consent. So once I get that parent consent, where I live, I have 45 school days to complete that evaluation. Now, that might seem like a long time, but it's actually not because that's not the only one I'm working on, and there's a lot of moving pieces to that. So once I get that consent, I have to calculate when it's due, and I flag that, and then I have to plan it out. So I have to look at the history of the student. Do they have any response to intervention data that I can look at? Do I have a history of test scores? Do I have observations from teachers? Do I have an interview from the parent? So I try my best to do a holistic review first to see what's needed here. What exactly am I looking for? Then I can start thinking about pulling for testing, because I can't really make a decision on what instruments to use until I know the whole background of the student that I'm going to see.
Excited to have Ms. Christen LaChance from the great state of Texas. She is experienced in so many different areas. She's a diagnostician, she's a professor, she's a special education coach. She has her own website, ChristenLaChance.com. So we're going to get into all those great things, but we're super grateful for Christen coming on the show to share her story, her journey, and her mission with our viewers. So Christen, thank you so much for coming on the show. What's going on in your life and your K12 career right now?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, like you just said, I wear a lot of different hats and I love each one for different reasons. And I would love to give each one a little bit of attention, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
Okay, yeah, my career started as a special education teacher. So I know what it's like to be in the trenches. So all you teachers out there watching, especially you special education teachers, I know it's really hard right now. And I applaud you all for everything you're doing, because it's not easy. Being a teacher right now is not easy. So add in having kiddos with disabilities, it's an extra challenge. So that is where I started. I loved it. I loved IEPs. I loved behavior plans. I loved people thought I was crazy, that I actually liked all that stuff. But I think I got the real experience of seeing how that IEP could make a difference in a kid's life. It could change how that parent showed up for that child to help work on their goals. It changed how teachers, even the general education teachers, could show up for their special education students. I was a big proponent for bridging that gap between general ed and special ed. I believed it's all just ed, so
yeah. Oh, I love that.
I think it's all the same. So when I first started, I really wanted to change that mindset of, oh, those are the special ed students and these are the gen ed students, because I still saw a lot of that. So that was what I really liked to focus on as a teacher. Then when I went to graduate school, I focused more on special education, specifically to get a diagnostician license. So where I live in Texas, we're called diagnosticians. It's very similar to a school psychologist. A couple other states have diagnosticians as well, but we specialize mostly in identifying students that have learning disabilities. So I do the assessments and help get students those services through special education. So I moved away from being a service provider, and then I started wearing the hat of the evaluation team and identifying students.
That's really interesting. Can you go deeper with the difference between what a diagnostician is and what a school psychologist is or does?
Sure. So they are similar. The goal is the same. A lot of times it's to help identify what those strengths and weaknesses are in the student and to see if you meet criteria for any services or accommodations under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that IDEA. Sure. So we work under those same policies, but typically a school psychologist is going to have a little bit more of a background in specifically psychology. Okay. So in many states, school psychologists have psychology degrees and psychology backgrounds. And licensing is under sometimes the same state board that like a therapist or something like that would be under. Whereas a diagnostician, you have to have teaching experience, and the licensing is done by the education agency.
Awesome. Awesome. So how long did you teach before you became a diagnostician?
So I taught for probably 3 or so years before I did my program. Took me a couple more years to do the program. Then I did some internship as well. So I was probably on year 6 or 7 by the time I started. So I had a decent amount of experience in classrooms under my belt too, which I think made the transition better for me.
100%. Yeah, we're similar in that regard. I have a background in special ed and actually did it for 11 years before I became an assistant principal. I loved it. I mean,
Yeah.
and I'm kind of old, so I was pre No Child Left Behind when I started in the 90s. And yeah, it was different when we were in classrooms, they would put literally every student in, of any disability in the same classroom. And it was horrible. But, now they don't do that. But I still see some separating, even if it's just in the mindset of people. And that's very bothersome to me. And I'm hoping that, there comes a time, and I love what you said about you don't look at it as sped, you just look at it as ed. So I'm going to take that. I got to run with that. That's really cool. Yeah, but it's true, right? It's just ed. And, some students need additional support, and that's fine, well and good. But at the end of the day, they're all our students. And the whole goal with special ed is to keep them in the least restrictive environment. So, yeah.
I'm so glad you said that. And an analogy I like to use with people when they're trying to understand what that continuum of services can look like is I say, well, most people need to go to the dentist, right? Okay. So I relate the dentist to being that general ed teacher. You always have to have good quality cleanings from your dentist all the time, I would hope, right? So, every student needs to have access to their dentist, to their general ed teacher. Now, sometimes a student, they might need braces and they might have to go to the orthodontist, right? Not every student, not everyone needs that, but some do. And they still have to keep going to the dentist. Right? And now maybe you need oral surgery. Maybe it needs way more attention. And so maybe you need to get more restricted. But again, that's not everybody. It's just that subgroup. But guess what? They still see their orthodontist and they still see their dentist. In the meantime, it would be crazy to say, well, now your endodontist is going to be your primary care provider. They'd be like, what? If I walked into like an orthodontist and said, can you give me a cleaning? They'd be like, no, right? You still need to see your dentist, right? So that's kind of what I try to tell schools is like, hey, make sure the kids are still getting their cleanings at the dentist, right? They still need to have access to that general education support, and that tier 1 instruction needs to be available for all of them.
Wow. Super powerful. I love that analogy. Once again, I got to use that one too. That's really good.
Good. I hope it resonates because when you explain it like that, I've seen administrators in IEP meetings go, oh, yeah, that's right. I'm like, exactly. So, and the same thing goes for over servicing students, right? Like maybe the kid just needs their teeth cleaned and they just need to go to the dentist. But if you drop them up at the endodontist for oral surgery, then why am I here? So it goes both ways.
That's super powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Oh wow. Christen is just dropping these little golden nuggets. This is awesome. Yeah. But everything you're saying is right. And I think for the average layperson that's out there that doesn't really understand that we have to provide these supports, but it doesn't make our students any different, and the analogy you use, I think people can really resonate with it. I think about my own 2 children. My son, he wears braces. My daughter doesn't need them, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, and when he goes, he might see the dentist and the ortho. And when she goes, she's only going to see the dentist. So yeah, I think a lot of people really can resonate with that example. So thank you for sharing that. That's pretty cool.
Absolutely. And I think that's why general education teachers are so important to special education. You can't have one without the other, right? So if I got just a paper cut, I could put a Band-Aid on it, right? So if gen ed teacher notices I have a paper cut, they can stop the bleeding if they're paying attention, if they're taking their data, if they're, keeping an eye on those skills. But if I wait until that paper cut gets bigger and it gets infected, now I've got a problem, and that would warrant a trip to the emergency room. So yeah, I like to look at it that way as well. I don't know if I have a good special ed referral if my gen ed teachers aren't helping me out and helping me keep an eye on these skills that they're doing and knowing what those standards are that they need to meet.
That's powerful. What district do you work with?
Right now I'm with Harmony Public Schools.
Oh, okay. So
it's a system in Texas throughout the state. So I'm with the DFW district.
Okay. Yeah, that's really cool. How many schools do you service?
Right now I have 5. And then I have a partner that's also a diagnostician that has the other 5.
Okay.
We're split that way.
Nice. Very nice. So what does a typical day look like for Miss LaChance?
It depends on the day. So I live and breathe by my Google Calendar, as I'm sure many of you all do the same. So I schedule things far ahead of time because I'm bound by my timelines that are, again, set by IDEA. And so for those of you that are not familiar, for a special education evaluation, for a student, that's a minor, obviously, we have to have their parent consent. So once I get that parent consent, where I live, I have 45 school days to complete that evaluation. Now, that might seem like a long time, but it's actually not, because that's not the only one I'm working on. And there's a lot of moving pieces to that. So once I get that consent, I have to calculate when it's due, and I flag that, and then I have to plan it out. So I have to look at the history of the student. Do they have any response to intervention data that I can look at? Do I have a history of test scores? Do I have observations from teachers? Do I have an interview from the parent? So I try my best to do a holistic review first to see what's needed here. What exactly am I looking for? Then I can start thinking about pulling for testing, because I can't really make a decision on what instruments to use until I know the whole background of the student that I'm going to see. You should never go in blind. So then I also try to schedule a classroom observation first, because as we know, kids can act different with you one-on-one than they do in the classroom with their teacher. So I definitely take my notes on how they act with me, but I need to see how they're acting with their peers, with their teacher, in their normal setting too.
That's true. I would have to believe that a lot of the students you deal with are probably at the elementary level, right? That's where we want.
They are right now. Yes. I do have experience with middle and high school, but currently I'm with elementary.
Sure, but I'm just thinking from the standpoint of when we want to identify students that need these additional supports. I would hope that it's earlier rather
Absolutely.
than,
So there's a difference between an initial evaluation and a reevaluation. So again, by IDEA, we have to do it again every 3 years at minimum. So typically more reevaluations are happening at the middle and high school level, but I have seen initials happen at middle school and high school. And it does break my heart a little bit, right? We want to catch it as early as we can, because all the studies point to early intervention, right? So a lot of initials are happening at that elementary level.
That's good. Yeah. And I'm hoping that that is the trend, because truthfully, if we're doing too many initials, that learning gap is already like this. And, like you said, they're not getting that support at those earlier stages, and that's the foundational level. And if we're not doing it at that time, then, children are getting left behind, not to use the cliche, but it's true. So
they are. And I have to have that conversation with administrators. So, hey, if you're an administrator, think about this on your campus. There are plenty of times I get a referral and I wish I had a stamp I could put on that says should have never been referred.
Wow.
So there are times where I'm like, hey, this kid's not a special education student, right? Like, this kid needs a little bit of tier 2 support. Maybe they need a little bit of something, but this is not a disability, right? I think we need to start taking seriously the weight of saying a child is disabled. This child has a disability that falls under one of these categories. And that's a heavy thing to say. But I know it's frustrating as a teacher when you're like, well, I feel like I've tried everything. And I always make sure to ask, okay, but are you okay if the outcome is, yes, this kid has a disability, right? Because that is what you're asking for when you're asking for a referral. So we need to make sure that we have a little bit of weight on that. We don't want to hand out IEPs like candy. That's not what it's for, right? It's for the students that truly have a disability.
That's true. So what made you choose being a diagnostician? Was it just something that maybe you had a role model and it was like, okay, I'm a SPED teacher right now and I'm just going to go this path? Or what made you do that?
Funny story. I actually told myself I would never do that. That sounds terrible. And I resisted it for a long time. I thought, who would sign up for that? You're just testing all the time and you just have deadlines all the time. Like, that doesn't seem great. Like, no, I don't want to do that. Then I actually started taking some classes under my special ed major for grad school. And I was like, oh, this is actually really fascinating. This is actually really neat that you can look at patterns of a student's cognitive performance and see things like their auditory processing, their processing speed, their visual abilities, and how that's all playing out in a classroom setting. I was like, wow, this is really cool. I'm kind of a data nerd sometimes in that way. So I didn't realize that was more what it was about. I think from the outside, all I saw was paperwork, meetings, deadlines. I'm like, why would I do that? That sounds terrible. Then I started doing it and I was like, wow, you can really impact the trajectory of a child's life and a family's life when you can help them get what they need. And I just felt like that was something I wanted to be a part of.
Wow. So, there's probably some special ed teachers out there right now that are watching us on this interview. What would you say to them if they're interested in taking a similar career path that you've taken?
I would say we need you. Please, we need you. It's really important. I know at least where I live in Texas, we have a shortage. So a lot of us have huge caseloads because we can't get enough people. So it's kind of a niche kind of thing. So, hey, like, come join the club. I would love to have you.
Awesome. So
Yeah.
are diagnosticians, are they on the same scale as a teacher? Or are they higher? How does that work?
Typically, they're paid more.
Okay. That's good to know. Y'all heard it. It's a
Yeah,
promotion.
there you go. That's an incentive. Yes.
Yeah, 100%. So, okay,
Yeah.
that's good to know. Okay. So how long does it typically take? So if someone is out there and they're certified as a SPED teacher, how long does it take to actually go through a program and get certified?
So it depends on if you have a master's degree already or not. So like where I live in Texas, it is a master's degree program. So I did mine in conjunction with a master's degree, but I know many of you out there are awesome teachers that already have master's degrees. And if that's you, there are certification programs that you can do if you already have a master's, because it is one of those programs that requires a practicum. So you have to be supervised by someone and do the hours and all that kind of thing. So you do have to complete the courses for the certification if you already did have a master's.
Okay. If you already have a master's, is the coursework something that can be completed in a year or less, or no?
I guess it would depend on where you went through and what state you're looking at. Like I know for me, it was about 2 years for my core work of my master's, and then another semester for my certification specific courses. So it depends on, what kind of classes you took. If you have a master's, I guess, in education already, where some of it might overlap, you might be better off.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. So if you had to do it all over again, I mean, you said you've been in this for 10 years, super hard to believe, but if you had to do it all over again and you could go back to the beginning, would you still choose K12 education as your career path?
I think I would.
Okay.
And I say that because as challenging as it is, public education is not for the faint of heart, right? We know this, but I don't think I knew at the time when I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed 18 years old, right? Trying to choose what I wanted to do. I think I thought teacher was the only path, right? Oh, well, that's what you do. That's education is being a teacher. I don't think I realized all the different roles that were in public education.
Sure.
In so many different niche areas in that, right? So even just under the special ed umbrella, there's so many different things that you can do. I have friends that are wonderful with ESL and bilingual populations, that work with gifted populations, that work with Title I populations, and you can focus on those areas that really speak to you. And I think that's really neat and something that other professions can't say that they have.
Yeah, you're right. But I also think the path that you took, for lack of a better term, gives you more credibility, right? Because, you can say, hey, I've been a teacher. I've been where you've been. And, I think you, especially when you find yourself in those meetings, you carry more weight if you can say, hey, I'm a diagnostician now, but I was in the trenches just like you guys for fill in the blank 10, 11, 12 years,
Absolutely. That can be hard sometimes. And I tell myself, don't forget what that was like. Don't be that clinician that's just crunching numbers and writing reports and going to meetings, and you forget what that classroom is like and what it's like to have to plan the lessons and do all these accommodations and be present for these students. Don't forget that. And when you're making your recommendations, be realistic for what the climate is like right now. And I think that good diagnosticians, good school psychologists will do that.
Yeah, I was the same way. When I became a teacher, I thought about all the great teachers I had, and I wanted to emulate the good. And when I became an AP, I thought about APs that I worked under and wanted to emulate the good. But also when I became an AP, I consciously told myself, don't forget, Joseph, what it's like to be in a classroom, and our case being special ed teachers, and I also have a caseload and all those things that teachers have to bear the brunt of, and they are on the front lines. And I just want to never forget. And for me, it's getting It's getting long because, it's been a long time since I've been a full-time classroom teacher, almost since 2005. So yeah, we're talking about like 17, 18 years since I've been in the classroom, and it is easy to forget. And that's why I'm on the sub list to get into these classrooms, and I'm having to deal with students in a different way than I normally would deal with them as an administrator.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And I think that helps the teachers that I work with give me better information. I tell teachers all the time, hey, if I come sit in your classroom, I promise I'm not watching what you're doing or not doing. I'm not checking if your objective's on the board. Like, that's not like, I'm not doing it, right? Like, I'm trying to see, hey, does this kid have access to good tier 1 instruction in this environment? And how is he or she functioning in this environment? That's all I'm looking at. And if you have questions, come ask me, come talk to me. Like, I don't want to be, oh, someone's coming to watch me, in the classroom kind of thing. I try to be as approachable and relatable as I can.
That's fair. That's really good. So let's say hypothetically, I didn't see you for the next 5 years. We didn't have any communication. 5 years from now, going into 2029, what is Christen LaChance doing?
I would hope that I am still working with university teacher education programs.
Okay. That's right. You're a professor, right?
Yes. And I think we need to strengthen our teacher preparation programs. Mm-hmm. I think it starts there. I think it starts at the grassroots. I think we have to incentivize these teachers to sign up for these programs, make them solid programs that help them feel ready with tools in their toolbox to set up a classroom. And I think if we can do that, I think K12 could look much different. Awesome.
Awesome. Do you see yourself being a full-time professor in 5 years?
Maybe. We'll see. I mean, I love it. So I would be happy to do that. I'm not quite ready to let go of working with my kids directly just yet. I do love it. But yeah, I think teacher education programs and colleges and universities, they need to be strong and they need to be ready to send these teachers out feeling prepared.
Awesome. Do you see yourself ever maybe becoming a school administrator?
People ask me that all the time. And I don't know. I don't know. It's a tough job. Like, hats off to you, because you have to make a lot of people happy, and it's hard to make a lot of people happy. You have to make some tough decisions that sometimes are unpopular, and it's rough. That's
very true. Yeah. But you have the temperament for it.
Oh, well, thank you. So maybe I'll think about it.
That's cool. Well, look, I really want to thank you for coming on the show and sharing your story, your journey with our viewers and our listeners. But Christen, before you leave, can you share some parting words of wisdom? Tell us how we can connect with you, and then we'll say goodbye.
Yeah, well, my website is a great way to connect with me. So you can click on the contact and write me a message there. And there's a spot for your email and phone number for me to get in touch with you. I love responding to people that way. I would say, for those that are currently in K12 schools, to not let the people on the outside keep you from doing what you know is right for your students. And if we keep putting our students and our teachers first, then we're doing the right thing.
I love it. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that advice. We'll definitely make sure that we put all of your contact information, including your website, your LinkedIn, your email. We can make that readily available to our viewers and our listeners. And also, I just want to share with you that I started this show to celebrate K12 educators like yourself. So I want to take this time to honor you, Christen, for all the great work that you've done over 10 plus years. I know you probably pinch yourself sometimes when, wow, it's been that long.
I know.
I know, right? But yeah, you've done great work, and I'm sure you've impacted the lives of many students in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And we definitely want to thank you. And I just hope you have many more years in this amazing profession.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you again for coming on the show. And something tells me this won't be the last time we'll be communicating. So we wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you.